and the role that it plays in moving the money around. Can you expound upon that a little bit?
So I want to talk about WeChat and the example I gave, and that it allows for speed and trust within the network. So never in my career with the DEA has a criminal organization had the benefit of an encrypted global network that they could communicate on. And what I mean by trust is U.S. law enforcement does not have the ability to intercept WeChat. We can't wiretap it. So if you compare that to 10, 15 years ago when I ran an undercover money laundering team to attack the black market peso exchange, you could wiretap the network. You can't do that with WeChat. The speed that I talk about and the example I gave earlier in my opening remarks, these transactions or communications happen within a day. It used to take 7 to 10 days, but WeChat allows for that speed because it's trusted within the Chinese money laundering network to communicate. They can rely on the person they're speaking with is a person that they can rely on to complete that transaction. Where again, the black market peso exchange was mistrusted, and they enforced the movement of money that it would flow through violence. You don't have violence. The Chinese money launderers have absorbed all the risk. But in terms of WeChat, that's an encrypted application that, whether it's additional legislation or a negotiated strategy within our executive branch of the government, we need to be able to impact WeChat so it's not a benefit to the Chinese money launderers.
Thank you very much. That's such an important part of the conversation about how money can move around without total anonymity, total privacy, and a very rock-solid system that eludes or evades capture in law enforcement in our country. And I'd love to have a deeper dive into solutions for that as we have an opportunity to talk later on as well. Thank you very much. Jelly Roll, quick question for you. As you know, your family in Charleston, the Probsts, are very close friends of mine. I called them just to say, tell me about Jelly Roll. The one thing they said was that he is authentic, he is sincere, and he speaks about the issues that has impacted his life.
Yes, sir.
And as a kid who grew up in poverty, I will say that sometimes the unseen and the unheard feel invisible. And one of the things that you're doing today is you're making visible those who still today feel like because of who they are, where they live, or what they do, they are somehow invisible. The challenge, of course, with drug addiction is it doesn't know a class or a race or a place. It's everywhere. Can you talk about the fact that, indeed, what we're talking about today impacts across all segments of our society in a devastating way?
Senator Scott, thank you. I was hoping to share this, so you bringing it up means a lot. I have the opportunity to go sing at dozens of rehab facilities a year and dozens of jails and prisons. Every time we do a show in a city, we go to their local jail or their local rehab and sing songs for them to encourage people. And in rehabs across America, I can tell you with certainty, I have seen everything from governors' children's in the same rehab as kids that have been homeless since they were 12. I mean, when I tell you that this drug, it has finally reached to the point, like I said, that we used to look at addicts and shame them, but now it's hard to because the rest of the world's finally realizing that the addict is actually their nephew. It's their cousin, and they know their cousin was a good person. They know that this isn't the actions of the cousin they know. They know this is the actions of the drugs. Senator Scott, Chairman Brown, I assure you that this touches every single human, white, black, every ethnicity, every race, everywhere in the United States of America. It is touching and hurting people and killing people. And that's why what y'all are doing is so important. It's bringing people together. It's making the unseen fiends felt seen. The voiceless have a voice, and we can't thank y'all enough for it.
Thank God that Congress can come together, not in a bipartisan way, but in a nonpartisan way to address the issues and the challenges facing Americans all over this country. And I certainly hope that my friends in the House are paying attention today, because it not already being law is a travesty. And I certainly hope my colleagues on the other side of the Capitol will take up this fend off fentanyl and get it done.
Thank you, Senator Scott. Senator Menendez of New Jersey is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I think in order to combat the fentanyl crisis, it's important to understand how these opioids are getting into the country. Mr. Urban, is it accurate to say that the vast majority of fentanyl trafficking comes into the country through official ports of entry?
Most of the fentanyl comes through official ports. It usually comes across the Mexican border, most of the fentanyl coming into the country.
But through official ports of entry?
Most of it, a majority of it probably does, yes, sir.
Yeah. Here's the facts. In 2021, over 90% of fentanyl seizures occurred at legal crossing points. Just 279 out of 1.8 million arrests by Border Patrol of illegal border crosses resulted in fentanyl seizure. So it seems to me that in the first place, if we are serious about it, one of the elements of this challenge is stopping fentanyl from coming into the United States, we would significantly increase resources to combat the flow of fentanyl across the border. We would think about dramatically enhancing our technology capability at those official points of entry where the vast majority, the 1.8 million arrests were taking place. And that would help us dramatically stem the flow. In order to make real progress in the fight against fentanyl, we have to hold foreign governments, such as China and Mexico, accountable to their commitments to crack down on producers and traffickers of synthetic opioids. In November at the APEC summit, China and the United States announced the resumption of bilateral cooperation on counter-narcotics, but we need more than words at this point. Mr. Urban, from your experience, what has China done to crack down on Chinese pharmaceutical companies that manufacture fentanyl and fentanyl precursors?
There's been limited, action within China from my perspective since I've left government in terms of doing that. During my time in government, I did not have insight within China in terms of what they were actually doing. We had certainly an office within the embassy there for DEA, and it had limited cooperation with Chinese law enforcement. We're trying to build that relationship at the time.
How about Mexico? What have they done to crack down on the drug cartels that mix fentanyl with other drugs and smuggle them into the United States?
So I think in a very difficult situation concerning the cartel's power and reach and ability to corrupt Mexican government components, they've done to some degree what they can under the circumstances, but it's been very limited in terms of their ability to counter or negate the ability of the Mexican cartels to traffic fentanyl here.
And these are two of our big challenges. The answer to both questions, in my view, is not enough. I appreciate that President Biden raised this with President Xi when they were at that summit. But this is why in 2019 I introduced the Fentanyl Sanction Act, which provided the U.S. government with tools and resources to sanction illicit traffickers and producers in China and Mexico. And why last year I introduced the Strengthening Fentanyl Sanctions Act to expand and extend those authorities. We have to try to reach abroad as well as we deal with issues domestically and put pressure on them. Certainly the Fentanyl Act is a very strong start, but I think there's other things that we can do as well. Lastly, I'd like to echo the chairman's support for the Fentanyl Act. It's a bipartisan bill. It authorizes practical and common sense steps to hold bad actors accountable. It builds on existing laws to better combat the flow of illicit opioids into the United States. I'd like to highlight a provision that I got into the bill that requires the Department of Treasury to report on actions taken by the People's Republic of China with respect to persons involved in the supply chain for fentanyl and fentanyl precursors. We can't not solve the fentanyl crisis within our borders alone. We have to address the international components of the supply chain as well. And do you believe those provisions of the bill, of the Fentanyl Act, that reaches beyond our borders are important as well?
I think they're critical. I fully support your statement that we have to essentially attack these networks outside the country to help protect the country. The sanctions component that you spoke about, and that's also in the Fend Act, is something that needs to be used more offensively and in greater in scale, and I mean dramatically greater in scale with speed. So again, versus 6 to 9 months in indictment, which takes a long time and a tremendous amount of resources, you want to dramatically increase the scale and the targeting and sanctions tool against these networks, whether it be Chinese precursor chemical facilitators, the chemical companies themselves, or anyone that's helping to facilitate this within Mexico, which is a variety of different components, sir.
Thank you. I hope our House colleagues will move quickly. Thank you, Mr.
Thanks, Sir Menendez. Senator Tillis of North Carolina is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. DeFord, where did you grow up in Antioch?
Sorry, I grew up between Priest Lake. I lived in Priest Lake for a while. Are you familiar?
I grew up in Trailer Park on Richards Road, went to Antioch High School.
Really?
Class of 78.
Yeah, we lived off, I was born in Bavaria Apartments off Haywood Lane.
I think they call it Country Meadows now.
Yeah,
right there.
I lived in Country Meadows at one point. It's right next to Apollo Apartments, right next to Pop's Old Car Wash.
Right.
Yes, sir. I'm very familiar with that
Apollo
trailer
Junior
park.
High School. I also had friends who got convicted for drug trafficking and had one commit suicide after substance abuse really took his life. But one thing I've noticed, one thing you said that I think is very important, you said you see a lot of fights up here, and there are, but there's some good stuff that happened. And one that I hope I can get you updated on is a bill that we passed last year called the Safer Communities Act. Because I'm sure you know, if you've looked at this the way I have, a lot of the people who are in addiction are self-medicating. They get there because they have behavioral health problems, they have trauma problems, they have a lot of challenges. We passed the bill last year on a bipartisan basis. Some of the folks on this committee voted for it, others didn't, but it's working very well. And it's helping expand behavioral health access. And we need help educating states like Tennessee, where I spent a lot of time, now I live in North Carolina, so that while we continue these fights, there's some good stuff that came out of this chamber on a bipartisan basis that will save lives. So we won't spend time educating you on this, but I'd love to have the opportunity to educate you on this so that we can make sure it gets implemented well in Tennessee. I'm doing my part in North Carolina. But thank you for being here. I'd look forward to the opportunity to speak with you separately.
I'd be honored. I believe that mental health and drug addiction go hand in hand.
We have this bill that in a pilot form, and one of the states that implemented about 7 years ago, we had a 50% reduction in mental health incarcerations. 50% reduction statewide. That says a lot about folks getting vectored into care that really makes a difference. So I'd like your help on promoting that and look forward to meeting with you. I also think we have to talk about the border talk. There is a fight going on right now on border security, and this is why you should be concerned with it. It looks like a fight, but we have cartels making about $1 billion a year, charging people a fare to get across the border, anywhere from $5,000 to $55,000 to come across the border illegally. They are making, according to the DEA, somewhere on the order of $1 billion a year now, and they are plowing that money right into poisoning our country. They have these things called the Sinaloa Air Force, where they're taking ultralights and landing, coming across the southern border, landing, dropping off drugs. Senator Menendez is right. The majority of them are coming through legal ports of entry. Part of that can be fixed by technology, but a part of it can be fixed by actually having Border Patrol patrol the border and legal ports of entry versus being engaged in the millions of people coming across the border illegally. We have to realize that we have to fix this, and we have to interdict more drugs, and we do have to hold China and Mexico more accountable. Mr. Urban, the China, we have to continue to pound the drum that China is poisoning over 100,000 people a year, and as Mr. DeFord said, about 70% of them are likely dying from fentanyl. But what more can we do to disrupt the money laundering? The cartels, the Mexican cartels don't launder money the way they used to. Now they call 1-800-CHINA, and they have a global network where they're laundering this money right before our very eyes. What sorts of policies should we take up to make that more difficult and disruptive?
So I think there's a couple of components there. One is we need to understand that we have home field advantage when it comes to money laundering, and what I'm talking about specifically within the domestic United States. Those bulk cash proceeds that I spoke about earlier are right here at specific points in time, but they always start right here within the United States. So we need to attack the networks and the money It's the proceeds we don't focus on enough. That's where the Mexican cartels and Chinese money launderers are vulnerable, right? That's where they're vulnerable. So in terms of attacking those networks, we need additional AML compliance and oversight.
Because my time's limited, Mr. Yost, I'll submit some questions for the record for you, because there's also a public safety issue with law enforcement I'd like to get to. We're not going to have time. But isn't it also going to require, I'm not necessarily big on regulations, but if we don't start figuring out the use of crypto and digital assets as a way of of really masking the laundering activities, I think we're going to miss a lot of what's going on. Do you agree with that?
So I certainly agree that crypto needs additional oversight and AML compliance. It's one component of the money laundering cycle that I spoke about.
Okay. Well, thank you all. Mr. DeFord, I am sincere when I say it looks like we lived in the same trailer park, but we also have a common background, and I'm very, very serious. I need help educating people, not once and done. What we do here is excuse me, you pass a bill and then you hope something happens. I want to make damn sure what happened in the 5 states that implemented, implemented the Safer Communities Act happened in Tennessee and across the country.
Yes, sir. You have a friend in me. I'd love to talk.
Thank you.
Mr. Ford, though it's not obvious, he graduated a few years before you did. Yeah.
It's also obvious he might be the only person in here as Southern as I am.
I don't think so, actually. Yes, the guy sitting to your left and a few people up here, John Tester isn't one of them, Senator Tester from Montana.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman Brown, Ranking Member Scott. Yeah, you haven't heard from Senator Kennedy yet. That's coming. I want to, first of all, thank the Chairman and Ranking Member for their leadership, not only in having this hearing, but also in the bill, the Fentanyl Act. It is long past time that this bill get passed. I think that Ranking Member Scott said it right. The shenanigans in the House need to stop, and we need to get some stuff done. I had a bill on China buying farmland. They stopped that. Wrong thing to do, but for probably political reasons they did it. But why they would stop this makes no sense to me. We need to categorize fentanyl as a national emergency that it is. We do need to hold China accountable for its role in this crisis. And we need to give law enforcement, border agents, the tools that they need to be successful. And in that regard, I want to thank each and every one of our witnesses for being here today and for your testimony. I think it's really important. I want to follow up a little bit on what Senator Tillis was talking about on the cash. Okay, the Fentanyl Act is a bill that we passed here, bipartisan, nonpartisan, big numbers. And the House screwed it up, which is what they tend to do most of the time anyway. But the cash issue is not something that we've talked a lot about. And the money laundering issue isn't something we've talked a lot about. You started to answer his question. I want you to finish that answer on what we need to do on this side of the dais to have some impacts on the money laundering aspects.
Thank you, sir. So I was touching upon additional AML compliance at financial institutions. They need additional oversight, and they need to better track with suspicious activity reports what's transpiring with Chinese money laundering. In addition to that, I think there's a tremendous opportunity with data, right? You can pull the data that I'm talking about that's on WeChat. So we go out, DEA goes out and does 10 arrests on a Chinese money laundering cell. If you pull all that data in from search warrants, judicial process on laptops, phones, and elsewhere, you can normalize that data and kick out targeting packages immediately to the field, right? So we're missing that opportunity with speed. We need to impact these organizations with speed. So in terms of funding and approach, there's an opportunity with data to go after the Chinese money laundering networks. The last one is the encrypted app that I talked about with WeChat. We have to be able to surveil and intercept that.
Let's go back to the AML. You're saying this money laundering, a fair portion of it, is going through our banking system right now, our regulated banking system?
That's correct. When the Chinese money laundering organization sells the dollars back to a Chinese customer that wants to invest or spend money in the States, the day before, those were the proceeds of the narcotics trafficking that we're talking about. So it is going into the system, yes.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Yos, I want to thank you for your support of not only the Fentanyl Act, but the Anti-Drugs Act that I have. You talked in your testimony about the impact it has on your fellow police officers handling this poison. And I have two questions. Number one, from a on-the-street standpoint, talk to me about how the Fentanyl Act will make a difference.
Well, Senator, I think the age-old problem that we will all have and will have after we leave, and it'll be on our next crisis, is that criminal enterprises are operating at a pace that is much further than we can make decisions and fix these problems. I think the Fentanyl Act is so very important because it gives us extra tools in order to be able to combat this. But the reality is this is just going to be the first step.
Yeah.
This is an evolution, and in order for us to have any meaningful impact, we need to do two things. And it was spoken here earlier. We got to operate at a faster pace. There's no reason whatsoever there's anyone here in Washington should be against finding ways to save and protect Americans from something that is clearly a crisis. And we need to stop. It needs to move at a much faster pace if we're going to keep up with those people that we're trying to combat. The other side of it is that it's frustrating to one, being overloaded, trying to deal with this crisis, trying to manage it with the manpower that exists, adding all of the other challenges that we have in law enforcement associated with it, and that is something that's always going to be a challenge. It's always going to be outpace what our resources are, and something that we need to give some attention to. But I think this bill is a huge step in bringing us in a direction, give us some tools in order to be able to take as long as we have, it's profitable. To do this, we're always going to be behind. We got to find a way to be able to break it up, and I think when it comes down to really following the money, regardless, it's always going to evolution. It's always going to evolve. There's always going to be new challenges for us, but I think we have to find a way to, at a much faster pace, be ahead of it. And this bill certainly puts us in that right direction.
Mr. Ford, I'm out of time. But I just want to say thank you very much. Your testimony was incredibly powerful, and what you do every day to impact lives for the better in this country is something we need to take notice of. And I don't know if you've ever been to Montana, but anytime, any place, you're welcome to come up, because I think your message needs to be heard all over this country, including rural America. So
Yes,
thank
sir.
you.
I'd love to see you there.
Thank you. It's a pretty state where you live. It's a pretty state where you live.
Oh, man.